Let's talk about some of the emerging strategies that are helping teams win in the FRC Rebuilt season. In some of these early phases, being able to control that fuel is really, really important. I'm Brogan Pratt, and I've been teaching robotics design for over a decade now. And today we're going to take a look at some of the top scoring matches from week 1 in the Rebuilt season. We'll talk about what kind of strategies in robot designs are starting to show some promise for the Rebuilt early season. So hopefully you can take some of these tips into you with your first competition. And near the end, we'll break down the current world record of almost 500 points in the first competition. So first up, we've got a couple practice matches. And while they are still practice, they're still a good judge for us to be able to see what are some of the early emerging strategies that are happening. So let's take a look at the Canadian Pacific Regional Day 1, and this is practice match 4. And the alliance to watch in this case is the Red Alliance. So we'll take a look at their autonomous as they come in here. With their autonomous, I think one of the important things we're seeing a lot of is we're seeing a lot of bullying happening in that center line. And we'll see later in some matches, one of the important things here is that teams need to make sure they're not fully crossing that center line, because that does end up causing you some fouls, and fouls are significantly more punishing this season as well. So at the end of the autonomous, one thing that we'll see is it's quite important to make sure that you are winning that autonomous. Now, of course, you have those first 10 seconds to be able to launch in more fuel into your section, but it doesn't mean that your opposing alliance ends up getting that field first. And one thing that we're noticing, and you're going to notice a lot of these, is that teams aren't really playing a lot of defense yet. There's a good amount of defense being played in the middle, trying to push up some of the other things, some of the robots out of the way, but we're not seeing a whack load of defense happening as we're actually going into the section here. I mean, we can see that the blue alliance here is free to sort of score on their own for the most part in that respect. Now, we do see the Red Alliance starts to be able to start lining themselves up to be able to load themselves in. And something you're going to see a lot of is these robots that have very large hoppers are really starting to take away some of the competition at the start here. Another smart strategy that I don't see enough teams, I think, utilizing that I think is going to be really beneficial this season is take a look at team 10120 here. Controlling the amount of fuel onto your side of the field is going to be critical this season because, of course, as obvious as it is, the more fuel you have, the more you can score. So take a look at what 10102 does here. A lot of teams, at least early from what I'm seeing in this practice, they're trying to load up their hopper and then they're trying to launch in fuel into the far side on their alliance's side. But what 10112 says or sees is that there's a large section of fuel here, just press up on the side, and they're able to just swing themselves in and push in all of this fuel right in the side. While it is beneficial to be intaking, I think this is a really smart play, getting close to that corner and feeding in a lot of that. That is a play that I think is going to, at least in the early season, and potentially as time goes by, really is going to help teams start getting more and more of that fuel up and going. We also see that this bump is holding up a lot of teams. It is really making it challenging for teams to get up and over that bump. There's a good chunk of teams that are high centering on top of that bump, and there's also a good chunk of teams that are yeeting themselves over and then getting beached on top of other fuel is another thing that happens. Teams that seem to be doing successful are teams that are getting prepared to be able to shoot right when that hub switching is happening. And I think that's obviously one of those, well, it's kind of obvious if you're ready to shoot, you're going to get a lot more points, but having a fully loaded hopper before ends up being really beneficial. Another thing we see is that it's starting to get really hard to see kind of in this bottom corner here. I believe in this year there's a new banner that makes it hard for the alliance to be able to see where it is that they're shooting and where a bunch of artifacts is loading up. So something I can see early on in the season and later in the season is having teams be able to make sure they're spending some time to be able to look and think, okay, is there going to be a bunch of fuel here? I haven't checked the bottom edge next to my driver station in a while. It's probably a good time for me to kind of start feeding along that section. So some pretty phenomenal work here out of teams 6766, 359, and 4270. I believe in the end, let's see what their final score ends up being once we factor in penalties, is 283 to 91. So some very solid work there out of the original points. Next up, we've got practice match 4 again from the Oklahoma Regional. And the team to watch this time is on the Red Alliance 1706, 2373, and 2383. Now, I want you to take a look at the start of this autonomous here, and we are going to have both the Blue Alliance and the Red Alliance starting to move themselves in to be able to try and grab this fuel right from the center here. They end up basically pushing against each other as they're trying to load up, and their hoppers are already full. I think one of the things that's really going to separate a lot of these top teams is the ability to shoot and move at the same time. Be able to pick some of these things up, load up a full hopper. Getting some less scoring in autonomous is going to be critical, but something that might also be beneficial is as teams are sort of mowing, in this initial mowing, be able to launch some of that artifacts in, so it's not just a full hopper, but also starting to control some of that fuel as it gets into their own hub, because that can really benefit you in later sections in the tele-op. While autonomous is going to be important this season, in my opinion, you're really going to start seeing the scores really start throw away inside of tele-op, particularly because in autonomous, scoring for fuel is effectively the same thing that's happening up. Similar here with 1706, that would have been a great opportunity for them to come along and scooch and push a lot of that back. Like we just saw, the blue lines here actually end up loading a whole bunch of fuel into the other side as well. So we've got about 15 seconds left in the Blue Alliance's active section for their hub. We can see that the Red Alliance already has a full hopper getting ready to go. What might be beneficial here for that Red Alliance, and those, instead of just kind of hanging out in the middle, if they could just be pushing some of that fuel in. But again, we do see over here 2 robots with completely full hubs. But once that hub switch happens, take a look at Red Alliance. Over here, we've got 3 robots with completely full hubs all the way on the other side here, just able to unload and put just a massive amount of fuel into that when you do have completely full hoppers. I mean, it is the end of the first Alliance switch, and they're already cracking almost 200 points. Some absolute insanity going on there. Now take a look at what our 1706 team is about to do here once their hub starts to swap. They're basically just going to feed along the edge here and just start launching in a whole bunch of fuel back in on that side. It is going to be so important to be able to corral in a good chunk of that fuel. And particularly if you're on the opposing alliance seeing things like this is a great time for you to be able to come in and start running some defense. At least in these early initial matches, one thing that I'm not seeing a lot of is I'm not seeing a lot of teams come into the opposing alliance side and start to play some defense that they can't really shoot a lot of these artifacts in. It may be beneficial to have yourself with a dedicated defense robot as they are trying to shoot some of that fuel out and into their own side, so that you don't end up having so much fuel in there, because as we're seeing, some of these scores can really start to run away on teams, particularly if there's very little defense being played. It seems to me, in my opinion, it's quite likely that we're going to end up having robots that have 800, 900 plus, might even be cracking into the 1,000 points when we start getting into some of these robots that are really well partnered together. So some excellent work here out of 1706, 2373, 2383. It looks like robots that have very large hoppers, at least in the early season, seem to be doing really well, particularly because you don't have a lot of defense that's being played. And because you don't have a lot of defense, you can kind of sit there and score freely. Once that defense starts coming into play, you might start running into some sections where you have a lot different outcomes. Next up, we've got practice match 16 for the Minnesota Bluff. There's a country, Minnesota Bluff Country Regional. I want to say county, but that's probably the wrong thing here. In this match, the alliance to take a look is the Blue Alliance, 111, 4174, and 3206. One thing you're going to see a lot of here, I think that having a full hopper, again, it's pretty clear full hoppers are doing really well on this. And some really impressive autonomous pathing, particularly in the early season from 4174, to be able to get them scoop up some of those fuel and then coming right back in again. Almost able to get 3 full cycles going on there. Now, of course, you do have those first 10 seconds where you're still able, and both hubs are indeed active, able to get scored in. We know that blue is going to lose off some of that, and 4174 is taking good advantage of that, as is 111. One thing that I don't think you'll see, or that we haven't seen a lot of, is teams really taking advantage of that first 10 seconds. Some teams are taking that time to make sure that they're hoarding up some fuel, whereas other teams are taking that time to make sure that they're actually getting in and scoring. Again, we see 4174 trying to take that move where they're starting to push some of that fuel in and really starting to hoard some of that fuel. And that is a pretty easy strategy. The amount of, or not easy strategy, but that's a strategy that's starting to come out at the start here. in some of these early phases, being able to control that fuel is really, really important to some of these early season matches. Next up, we've got Northern Lights Regional. Again, practice match 16. Seems like practice match 4, practice match 16 seem to be coming up a lot here. The team to watch here is Red Alliance, 2472, 5913, and 6045. So let's take a look at what they are rocking off with their autonomous. Of course, I love seeing the human players coming in to be able to play in up there. They've got quite a bit of fuel there. Get your best free throwers getting in there. Also, again, we've got Blue Alliance with some free throwers. Of course, once the robots come in, human beings just cannot match that amount of output. It's almost like that scene from Elf where you have that little children trying to shoot snowballs, and then Will Ferrell is just absolutely rapid firing some of those in. Now, again, you do have that 10-second section up at the start where both are active, and it's not clear to me at this point. It seems to me that teams that are focusing on at least trying to get one round of scoring in seem to do better than teams that are just trying to focus on getting fuel onto their side. So a little bit of scoring in those first 10 seconds seem to be pretty critical. I do like seeing, and you saw that, we'll go back a little bit here, watch Red Alliance as they start to move in some of this fuel. They are starting to push a lot of that fuel in here. We see that there's a lot of fuel getting held up near the bottom here. Oh. We see a lot of fuel getting held up in the bottom here, and be able to sort of corral and push a lot of that fuel in is a really critical piece for these robots. Particularly, we're about to see here, both Red Alliances are going to come in and start corralling some of that fuel in. Sort of that push along the wall and using those barriers as a way of getting things in, particularly right before your hub is about to be active. It's really useful for your drive coach to make sure that your drivers know when their hub is going to be active. And again, we see just with those huge hoppers being able to just have a huge amount of fuel being scored in a very short period of time. You got 154 coming up within that first 10 seconds. But it looks like a lot of this, you can get about 1 or 2 volleys in. And once you get through about 2 full hoppers, there's not too much scoring left that you can do before that point. Make sure you're really watching when those hub counters are going to be moving up. And then again, coming in and starting to play a little bit of defense, we can see that the Red Alliance is starting to do that, starting to be able to push some of this robots out. As well, on that defense, making sure that they're also trying to collect some of the fuel that's on the far side. I know it starts to get challenging to be able to see the opposing lines when you're all the way over there, but it's definitely some things that teams are going to have to focus on this season. Next up, we've got some of the Istanbul regionals. I believe this is match 1 in the playoffs. And this is the current world record, at least at the time of recording. And the team to watch here is 9483. They have such a large hopper that they're capable of scoring 450 plus just all on their own. One of the things that's really critical about this robot is his ability to shoot while moving. And in my opinion, the ability to shoot while moving, whether you have a swerve drive that is rotating your entire robot, whether you have a turret that is moving around, the ability to shoot and move is really going to make a huge difference, because we can see that shooting and moving here on the edge, they're able to, 9483 is able to just collect a ton of fuel as their hopper starts to load up, just start feeding in even more fuel and then starting to corral it over on that other side. That's something we've been seeing from a lot of these early matches, is just the importance of getting a lot of fuel over on their side, as well as moving themselves over to make sure that they have sufficient time before their hub starts to be active, so they can start firing in before their hub even turns active at this point. And you can see, because there is just so much fuel being hoarded up over here in this section, that does give them a lot of ability to just start running away with that score again. And be able to shoot and move means that they can load and pick things up while they are shooting. Again, whether that is with a swerve drive and a fixed drive, or whether you're using a turret, just like 9483 is using here. I've even seen some teams in this early match having 2 turrets to be able to have a little bit of higher throughput on that is a pretty critical piece. Again, you can see that, they don't even need to use that strategy we've seen some teams using of being able to push things in on that side. They can just simply stand where they are, load in a lot of that fuel, and just start launching it up over their side. And it's about to start getting active here, and they're about to start loading in more hoppers. And loading in more fuel here. I believe by the time that this score is done, it ends up being 500 plus points by the time things are all said and done. So that importance of just that crazy high throughput on a hopper, as well as just having a larger hopper, is going to be really important this season, as it is, we're saying. So let's take a look at the final scores here. Let's skip ahead a little bit. We end up with 582 to 45 for the Blue Alliance. So a pretty crazy amount of scoring out of there. Next up, we'll take a look at their finals match number 1 as well, just to take a look at 94-83 again. We'll go back to the start of this match. And I want you to take a look at their autonomous strategy here. They come up, load themselves up with a nice full hopper. Even with other robots coming in there, it's still pretty possible that you'll end with a pretty full hopper. Again, they shoot and move themselves, and then they start loading in from the human zone here, from that outpost, to be able to get even more in on that autonomous period. Some pretty wild stuff coming out there. We're talking 88 points out of autonomous from the Red Alliance there. And again, that ability to shoot while we move, we see that the Rembrandts are also capable of shooting while we're moving in the 4481, but at least in these early phases, just having a really large hopper really does seem to be taking away some of those matches and taking away the ability to just have so much more fuel in there. So at least early season, looks like large hoppers seem to be the play at the moment, as well as the ability to get something like shooting while moving working is going to be pretty critical, or alternatively having a really high throughput. Because while 94-83 can shoot while they're moving, one of the things that does have that is that, one, there's not really a lot of defense being played against them right now, so they do have a lot more ability to be able to move themselves around. 2, you don't have other robots taking up a lot of their fuel as well. So while a really large hopper does stay quite well, at these early season, the question seems to remain whether you have more opponents be able to load in more of those fuel, as well as more of your lines be able to take up more of that fuel around your section, whether that will still be as successful in the late season as it is in that early season. Because of course, in the early season, for the most part, if you have a robot that can shoot, a robot that can move, and can do these things consistently, you're more likely to be able to continue to advance on throughout your region, particularly in the early section and in the early seasons, in the early qualifiers, because you just have something that is working. I mean, that is the reality at the end of the day. When it comes to robot design, consistent robots, generally the ones that end up doing well, end up advancing, and end up achieving, because for the most part, that's what we build robots to do. We build them to be consistent. So I'm curious your thoughts about what kind of strategy you've been seeing in these early seasons in the week 1 events, whether you agree or disagree about what are your thoughts on these hoppers and these very large hoppers doing well in the early season. Whether you think we're going to start getting a little more fuel starved as time goes by. I'm curious on your thoughts. Let me know in the comments down below. And as always, best of luck out there this rebuild season.